My name is Evelyn Carter, 58 years old, born and raised on the south side of Chicago. 30 years in the courthouse taught me two things. Justice moves slow, and the truth never hides forever. I thought I'd seen every kind of betrayal, until it came knocking at my own front door. It was 12. 58 im. When the doorbell shattered the silence. The rain was coming down hard, that Chicago kind of rain that pounds the windows like it's angry at the city. I wasn't asleep. Haven't been, not since my husband passed 5 years ago. I live alone now, in a house that still smells faintly of his cologne and old case files. When I opened the door, my son Malcolm stood there, soaked, shaking, eyes wide with something worse than fear. "Mom," he whispered, voice cracking. Aisha's gone, and so is everything. Sevens. In that instant, the hallway light flickered, like even the house knew something had just broken. If you've ever trusted someone so deeply that you'd bet your whole life on them, stay with me. This story might remind you why trust is a beautiful gift, but a dangerous currency. Because that night, in the middle of the storm, I learned. Even love can be weaponized. Malcolm stumbled inside, dripping water onto the hardwood floor. His hands trembled as he tried to speak, but the words came out like broken glass. She cleared it all. Mom, the accounts, the house fund, even Dad's trust. Sevens. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. Then I saw the look in his eyes, the hollow kind that comes when a man realizes love has turned into a weapon. I guided him to the couch, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders like I used to when he was a boy. The smell of rain mixed with the faint scent of fear. "Aisha," I said slowly, tasting the name like it was something bitter. "My daughter-in-law. Beautiful, brilliant, ambitious. The kind of woman who made you believe she had her life together. She'd won Malcolm over in months. Too smooth, too perfect. I'd told myself to let him be happy. Malcolm buried his face in his hands. She left a note," he whispered, pulling a crumpled paper from his pocket. The ink had bled from the rain, but I could still read it. "I'm sorry. This isn't your fault. I just can't live small anymore. Small. That word stuck in my throat. We weren't rich, but we had built everything with honesty. And now it was gone, evaporated into the storm. Outside, thunder cracked like a gavel. Inside, I felt something old and cold awaken. The part of me that had seen too many criminals think they'd never get caught. That night, I knew one thing for sure. Aisha hadn't just stolen money. She'd declared war on my family. I didn't waste time crying. 30 years in law enforcement had trained that out of me. Grief could wait. Evidence couldn't. "Show me your phone," I told Malcolm, voice steady. He hesitated, then handed it over. Within minutes, I was scrolling through transaction logs, cross-checking timestamps. Every withdrawal hit between midnight and 4 a.m. Clean, precise, deliberate. Whoever did this knew how to move money without leaving fingerprints. I walked to my study, flipped on the old brass lamp, and pulled out a worn leather notebook, the one I swore I'd retired with my badge. Inside were numbers, names, people who owed me favors in the city's underbelly of justice. Judges, clerks, 1 or 2 federal agents who still answered my calls. Malcolm followed, pale and exhausted. "Mom, what are you doing?" "Sevens?" I looked up, meeting his eyes. Exactly what I was trained to do. You said she took everything. That means she left a trail, and I'm going to find it before it goes cold. Sevens. He opened his mouth to protest, but stopped when he saw the determination on my face. Because that was the moment my son realized his mother wasn't just someone who believed in justice. She was justice, walking back into the storm. I know some of you might think this sounds like another messy family drama. Money, betrayal, heartbreak. But listen carefully. Because if it could happen to me, a woman who spent 3 decades watching justice unfold inside Chicago's courthouses, it can happen to anyone. That night, as rain pounded the windows and my son sat broken on the couch, I made a silent promise, to him and to myself. I would not let this end with tears or apologies. I would turn every ounce of pain into precision. If you've ever been blindsided by someone you trusted, don't let it end with their betrayal. Stand up. Breathe. Remember, pain is just information. What you do with it decides who wins. Because sometimes justice doesn't start in a courtroom. It starts in your own living room, when you finally decide to fight back. By morning, the storm had calmed, but inside me, another one had begun to rise. The city outside my window was washed clean, Chicago's skyline cutting sharp against a gray dawn. I brewed my coffee the way I always did, strong, bitter, no sugar, and opened my laptop like I was clocking in for work. Old habits don't retire, they just sleep until duty calls. Malcolm sat across from me, eyes red from crying, still wearing the same clothes as last night. I already called the bank, he said quietly. They said the accounts were closed from an online request. Everything transferred to a consulting firm. Sevens. What consulting firm? I asked. He hesitated. Emberstone Financial Consulting. Sevens. The name was slick, professional, too clean. I typed it in, and the search results came back empty except for a dead website and one press release with Aisha's name on it. My stomach tightened. This isn't a company, I murmured. It's a shell. Sevens. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through contacts until I found one I hadn't used in years. Marcus Green, an old friend from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. We hadn't spoken since I retired, but I knew he'd answer. Evelyn Carter. His gravel voice came through after 2 rings. Haven't heard that name in a... Sevens. By morning, the storm had passed, but the silence it left behind felt heavier than the rain. Malcolm sat at my kitchen table, staring into his untouched coffee, while I flipped through printed bank statements. The numbers screamed what he still refused to believe. She didn't just move the money, I said. She built a system to erase it. Sevens. He shook his head, voice barely a whisper. You don't know her, Mom. Aisha isn't... Sevens. Stop. My tone was sharper than I intended, but I couldn't help it. You think I don't want to be wrong about her? I do. But look at these transfers, baby. She used your father's trust, like an ATM. Sevens. He ran a hand through his hair, eyes filling with tears. She loved me. I know she did. Sevens. I sighed, sitting across from him. Maybe she did, in her own twisted way. But love doesn't make you drain a man's future while he's at work. Sevens. Malcolm slammed his palm on the table, a flash of anger breaking through his grief. You always hated her. You never gave her a chance. Sevens. For a heartbeat, I saw the scared little boy he used to be, defending something he didn't understand. I reached across the table, taking his trembling hand. I wanted her to be the one, Malcolm. I prayed for that. But wanting something to be true doesn't make it real. Sevens. He looked away, ashamed, his voice cracking. I should have listened to you. Sevens. I squeezed his hand gently. No, son. You were supposed to believe in her. That's what good men do. But now, you learn what strong men do. They face the truth and fight back. Sevens. I stood, grabbed my coat, and nodded toward the door. You can sit here and mourn her lies, or you can come with me and start reclaiming your life. Sevens. He hesitated, then rose to his feet. There it was, the first spark of fight in his eyes. If you've ever watched someone you love defend the person who hurt them, you know that look. That's the moment heartbreak turns into awakening. And in my house, awakening always meant action. 2 days later, the case started unraveling. Fast. My contact at the FBI, Marcus Green, called just after sunrise. Evelyn, he said, his gravelly voice carrying that familiar edge of bad news. You might want to sit down for this. Sevens. He'd run a full background search on Aisha Robinson. Only that wasn't her name. Her real name was Nia Rollins, born in Atlanta, with 2 previous aliases, 3 fake businesses, and a trail of frozen accounts stretching from Georgia to Texas. She'd been investigated once, years ago, for romance-linked financial fraud. Never charged, never caught. I felt my stomach twist. How the hell did she end up in my family, Marcus? Sevens. She's good, he replied. Smart, patient. She studies her targets for months, builds credibility, and moves in just close enough to control the money. Your son wasn't her first. He was just her cleanest hit. Sevens. I looked over at Malcolm, who was watching me from the living room, eyes red, expression empty. He doesn't need to know all of that yet, I murmured. But deep down, I knew he'd have to. There's no healing in half-truths. I printed every document Marcus sent, spread them across my dining table like a crime scene. Photos, credit histories, shell companies. And there she was, in each city, under a different name, smiling in different clothes, but always with the same eyes. Calculating, confident, beautiful. When Malcolm approached, I didn't sugarcoat it. She's done this before. Sevens. He stared at the papers for a long time, then whispered, So, none of it was real. Sevens. I wanted to lie, to tell him love always leaves something real behind. But the truth mattered more. No, baby, not the way you hoped. Sevens. He turned away, his voice breaking. I thought I was saving her from her past. Turns out, she was repeating it. Sevens. I rested a hand on his shoulder. Then we stop her before she ruins anyone else's future. Sevens. If you've ever discovered that someone's entire life was a performance, you know that sickening chill. It's the moment you stop doubting yourself and start doubting everything you thought was love. By the 4th night, I wasn't sleeping anymore, just thinking. Every case I'd ever worked, every trick I'd learned about how criminals slip through cracks, was crawling back into my mind. If Aisha, or Nia, whatever name she was hiding under now, thought she could vanish without consequence, She'd chosen the wrong mother to cross. I started with what I knew. Greed never retires. People like her don't disappear. They pause, wait for a new opening. I needed to create one. I called Marcus. "She's too smart to come back on her own," I said. "But what if she thought there was still money left?" "Sevens," Marcus grunted. "You're thinking bait." "Sevens." Exactly. A fake investment fund. Something only she'd know about, because she set it up. Sevens. Within 24 hours, I'd resurrected an old account name from her forged paperwork, Blue Horizon Equity, and wired a mock deposit under Malcolm's name. Marcus arranged for it to flag certain tracking systems the second she touched it. Malcolm watched as I typed. "Mom, are you sure this is safe?" "Seven." I didn't look up. "Safe isn't how you catch a predator, son. Smart is." Sevens. When the setup was complete, I leaned back in my chair, feeling that familiar adrenaline I hadn't felt since my courthouse days. The thrill of order restoring itself, one calculated move at a time. Later that night, I found Malcolm standing by the window, staring out at the rain-glazed streets. "I keep thinking she'll just walk back through that door," he murmured. "She will," I said quietly. "Just not for the reason you want." Sevens. He turned to me, eyes tired but determined. "Then what do we do when she does?" Sevens. I gave him a faint smile. "We make sure this time the house isn't hers to burn." Sevens. If you've ever been betrayed and dreamed of taking control again, remember this. Revenge is loud, but justice is quiet. It moves slowly, deliberately, like a storm you see coming, and you let it hit, because you built the shelter yourself. It was a gray Thursday afternoon when the devil came home wearing perfume. I was in the kitchen, frying chicken, when I heard the front door creak open. For a split second, I thought it was Malcolm, until I heard that voice. Smooth, calm, calculated. "Hello, Mrs. Carter. I thought I'd stop by." Sevens. Aisha. She looked exactly the same as the day she disappeared. Flawless makeup, tailored coat, that smile that could charm a priest into lying. But her eyes, they gave her away. There was no remorse in them, just strategy. I wiped my hands on a towel and met her at the doorway. "You've got some nerve showing up here." Sevens. She tilted her head, pretending confusion. I came back to explain. "I made a mistake, but I'm not a criminal." Sevens. Behind her, Malcolm froze halfway down the stairs. He looked pale, torn between fury and longing. "Aisha." He breathed, as if saying her name might wake him from a nightmare. She turned toward him, tears filling her eyes on cue. "Baby, I panicked. I just needed time to fix things. I was scared." Sevens. It was theater, and I'd seen better performances in courtrooms. Malcolm's shoulders sagged. I could see him melting again, the way good men do when they mistake manipulation for forgiveness. I stepped between them. You don't walk out on someone, steal their life savings, and call it a panic attack. Sevens. Her expression hardened for a heartbeat before the mask slid back on. "You've always hated me, Mrs. Carter. You never believed I could be good enough for him." Sevens. I smiled coldly. "Honey, I didn't hate you. I just recognized your kind." Sevens. Her jaw tightened, but before she could answer, I raised a hand. You hungry? I've got fried chicken on the stove. Sevens. Her eyes flickered. Suspicion, then calculation. She thought I was softening. Let her think it. Sometimes the best way to study a liar is to feed them dinner. As I set plates on the table, I noticed her glance at Malcolm, then the hallway camera light blinking red. She didn't know it was recording, streaming straight to my friend Marcus at the bureau. If you've ever had to face the person who tore your life apart, you know that moment. The air feels too thick to breathe, and every word becomes a weapon. But I wasn't planning to attack. I was planning to watch her destroy herself. Dinner that night could have passed for a peace offering, if you ignored the storm beneath every breath. The three of us sat around my kitchen table, plates full, hearts hollow. Malcolm tried to fill the silence with small talk, but the air was too sharp, too loaded. Aisha dabbed her mouth with a napkin, then reached into her purse. I didn't come here to fight, she said softly, pulling out a flash drive wrapped in tissue. I came to prove I wasn't the one behind all this. Sevens? I froze mid-sip. Excuse me? Sevens. She slid the drive across the table.
That account you found, Emberstone Consulting, it's not mine. It belongs to my former business partner, Devon Hale.
He framed me when I tried to leave. Sevens. Malcolm blinked, hope flickering like a dying candle. So, you didn't take the money? Sevens. Aisha's voice trembled just enough to sound real. No. Devon used my credentials. I left, because I was scared he'd hurt us both. Sevens. It was a good lie. Layered, emotional, rehearsed. The kind of story designed for someone like my son, who still believed people could change if you just loved them hard enough. I leaned back, arms folded. Convenient timing. You vanish for weeks, then walk back in with a perfect villain to blame. Sevens. She met my gaze, calm but with a glint of defiance. Believe what you want. But that drive holds records, transactions, messages, proof. I came back to clear my name. Sevens. Marcus had warned me. Con artists often plant false trails to confuse investigators, claiming innocence while burying new evidence to their advantage. Still, I played along. Then, you won't mind if we run this through the bureau. Sevens. Her smile faltered. Is that really necessary? Sevens. Oh, absolutely, I said, standing. If you're innocent, the truth will help you. Sevens. Malcolm looked from me to her, torn. Mom, maybe we should hear her out first. Sevens. Enough, I cut in. We're done talking until the facts due. Sevens. Aisha rose slowly, smoothing her coat. You've always underestimated me, Mrs. Carter. Be careful what you start. Sevens. When the door shut behind her, Malcolm collapsed into his chair, whispering, Maybe she's telling the truth. Sevens. I didn't answer. Instead, I picked up the flash drive and slid it into my pocket. If you've ever stared at evidence handed to you by a liar, you know the feeling. Truth and deception start to look the same, until you learn which one burns faster when you light the match. The next evening, Aisha showed up again, uninvited, holding a bottle of red wine and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. A peace offering, she said. We've both said things we regret. Sevens. Malcolm hesitated, but I caught the flicker of hope in his face. Hope was her favorite weapon. Dinner. she added sweetly. One last time before lawyers get involved. Just closure. Sevens, I should have told her to leave. But something in her tone, too rehearsed, too calm, told me there was more to this closure. And if she was going to play her final hand, I wanted to see it. We sat down at the dining table again. Same seats, same tension, different stakes. Aisha poured the wine with steady hands, the liquid catching the dim light like blood. She handed a glass to Malcolm, then turned to me. None for you. Sevens. Never drink when I'm watching a liar perform, I said flatly. She smirked. Suit yourself. Sevens. As the night dragged on, she kept steering the conversation back to guilt, forgiveness, second chances. Her voice was honey over razors. Malcolm's guard was lowering, his shoulders relaxing. He was starting to believe her again, and that scared me more than anything. When she turned away to grab her purse, I noticed it. A faint white residue along the rim of Malcolm's glass. Subtle, but not invisible. Old instincts flared like sirens. Malcolm, I said evenly, switch glasses with me. Sevens. He blinked. What? Sevens. Now. Sevens. He obeyed, confused. I lifted his glass and pretended to sip. Then I stood, smiled at Aisha, and excused myself to the kitchen. My hand shook slightly as I pulled out a small evidence bag from my drawer. Old habits die hard, and poured the wine sample inside. A minute later, Aisha's face turned pale. Her hands trembled as she touched her throat. "Excuse me," she gasped, staggering toward the sink. The panic was real this time. Malcolm jumped up, shouting her name. I stayed calm, dialing 911. Possible poisoning, I said evenly. Female, late 20s. Sevens. When the medics arrived, I watched them carry her out on a stretcher. Malcolm was shaking, tears brimming. Mom, what just happened? Sevens. I rested a hand on his shoulder. She tried to kill you, son, but justice eats its own. Sevens. If you've ever stared into the eyes of someone who meant to destroy you, you know this truth. Evil never comes screaming. It smiles, pours your wine, and waits for you to drink first. By sunrise, the chaos had quieted. The paramedics said Aisha would live. Just a mild reaction, not a fatal dose. I sat in my living room, hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, watching the sky lighten through half-drawn blinds. Marcus arrived before 8. Same trench coat, same no-nonsense energy he'd carried since his FBI days. You're lucky you caught it in time, he said, flipping through his notes. Toxicology confirmed traces of atropine, enough to knock him out, not enough to kill. Sevens. Why not finish the job? I asked. Marcus sighed. Maybe she didn't want him dead, just sick enough to cash the insurance early. Sevens. I looked over at Malcolm, asleep on the couch, pale but breathing steady. He'd cried himself into exhaustion sometime after Aisha was taken away. For the first time, he looked like a man who finally understood the monster he'd been married to. I want her charged, I said quietly. Attempted murder. Fraud. Whatever sticks. Sevens. Marcus hesitated. That's where it gets complicated. Sevens. I raised an eyebrow. How so? Sevens. He placed a folder on the coffee table and flipped it open. When we raided her apartment, we found digital ledgers, bank codes, transfer authorizations, offshore links. Most were in her handwriting, but one signature kept repeating. Same initials, same authorization level as hers. Sevens. I leaned forward, frowning. Whose? Sevens. Marcus's eyes met mine, apologetic. Lorraine Pierce. Sevens. My breath caught. No, that's not possible. Sevens. He didn't answer, just slid the documents across the table. I recognized the handwriting before I even saw the name. My sister's. Lorraine and I hadn't been close for years. She'd worked at a regional bank, left after a scandal that never quite made the papers. We'd stopped talking after my husband died. Too many old arguments, too much pride. And now, here she was, tangled in the same web that nearly killed my son. Marcus closed the folder gently. Looks like she was helping Aisha move the funds through a trust registered under her credentials. Probably thought it was a side investment. Maybe even believed Aisha's lies. But there are patterns suggesting she took a cut. Sevens. The room went still. The only sound was the slow ticking of the clock above the mantel. When I finally spoke, my voice came out colder than I felt. Get me an address. Sevens. Marcus hesitated. Evelyn. Sevens. Don't. I cut him off. Don't tell me to calm down. She helped that woman rob my family. My son. Maybe she didn't know at first, but she damn sure knows now. Sevens. He nodded once, sliding a slip of paper toward me. I stood, straightened my coat, and looked toward Malcolm sleeping on the couch. Keep him safe, Marcus. I've got one more door to knock on. Sevens. If you've ever chased the truth long enough, you learn a painful lesson. It doesn't always lead you to strangers. Sometimes, it leads you straight back home, to the blood you thought you could trust. And that morning, I wasn't just a mother hunting justice. I was a sister walking into betrayal. Lorraine lived on the north side now, one of those quiet Chicago neighborhoods, where every house looked the same, and no one asked questions. I parked 2 blocks away, giving myself time to breathe. My palms were slick against the steering wheel. 30 years of facing criminals hadn't prepared me for knocking on my own sister's door. When she opened it, her face went pale. Evelyn, she whispered, clutching her robe tighter. I didn't expect you. Sevens? No, I said, stepping past her into the tidy living room. You expected Marcus's people instead. Sevens. She froze, lips parting. So, you know. Sevens. I nodded, scanning the room. Family photos, Bible verses framed neatly on the walls, the illusion of virtue everywhere. You helped her move the money. Sevens. I didn't know. Evie, she blurted, tears already forming. Aisha said it was for a legitimate fund, community investments. She even mentioned your name, said you were on board. Sevens. I turned sharply. Don't lie to me in your own damn house. Sevens. She flinched, sinking into a chair. At first, I just processed transfers, small amounts, nothing alarming. Then I saw the offshore accounts. I confronted her, and she threatened me, said she'd expose things from my old job. I panicked. Sevens. Panicked. I repeated, voice trembling with fury. You laundered stolen money while my son was being destroyed by her lies. Sevens. Tears streaked her cheeks. I didn't think she'd hurt him. I swear, I thought I could fix it before it went too far. Sevens. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at the woman who shared my blood, but not my backbone. Finally, I pulled out my phone. You're going to call Marcus. Right now. You'll tell him everything. Dates, accounts, passwords. You'll cooperate fully, or I swear, Lorraine, I'll make sure you face every consequence she does. Sevens. Her chin quivered. You'd turn me in? Sevens. I met her gaze without blinking. I already did. Sevens. If you've ever had to choose between loyalty and justice, you know it isn't really a choice at all. It's just a mirror, showing you who you've been all along. And that morning, I saw clearly. My sister was the shadow I'd spent my life outrunning. By the time I got home, the sky had turned a bruised gray over Chicago. Malcolm was sitting on the porch steps, still in yesterday's clothes, his eyes swollen from another sleepless night. He looked up as I approached, trying to read my face. You talked to her, he said quietly. I nodded. She confessed. Sevens. He didn't ask who. He didn't need to. The silence between us carried the answer. Aunt Lorraine, he whispered. I sank onto the step beside him, feeling the weight of everything crash down at once. She helped move the money. Claimed she didn't know, but ignorance doesn't clean dirty hands. Sevens. Malcolm ran his fingers through his hair, shaking his head. How did it get this bad, Mom? Aisha, now Aunt Lorraine. It's like everything good in my life turned out to be a lie. Sevens. I studied him. My gentle boy, the one who'd always led with heart instead of instinct. That's not true, I said softly. You still have your name, your integrity, and a mother who refuses to quit. That's what's real. Sevens. He gave a dry laugh. And what do I do with that? It's not money. It's not a future. Sevens. I turned to face him fully. It's foundation. The rest you rebuild. Sevens. For a while, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the wind pushing against the porch rail. Then, slowly, something shifted in his expression. His jaw tightened, shoulders straightened. What happens next? He asked. You help me finish this, I said. We go through every document, every transfer, every lie. You'll see how she built the trap, and together we'll tear it down. Sevens. Malcolm nodded slowly. No more hiding. Sevens. No more, I said. Not from her. Not from what you feel. Sevens. He reached for my hand, the same way he used to when he was little and afraid of thunderstorms. Only this time, his grip was steady. If you've ever watched your child break, you know that heartbreak comes with two choices. Stay shattered, or build something stronger from the pieces. That afternoon, as we walked back inside, I saw it in him for the first time since this nightmare began. Malcolm wasn't just my son anymore. He was becoming my partner in justice. The news came just after dawn. Marcus called while I was pouring coffee, his tone clipped and urgent. She's gone, Evelyn. Slipped out of the hospital around 3 a.m. Sevens. I felt the mug freeze in my hand. Gone. How the hell does a woman under police watch just vanish? Sevens. She had help, Marcus said grimly. We think one of her old contacts forged a discharge order. Cameras caught her leaving in a nurse's uniform. We traced her rideshare to Union Station. She's heading north, probably trying to cross into Canada before the indictment is filed. Sevens. I set the mug down hard enough to crack it. Then, we're going after her. Sevens. Marcus hesitated. You're not Bureau anymore. Sevens. I don't care, I said. She tried to kill my son. You think I'm sitting this one out? Sevens. He sighed, then relented. All right, but you follow my lead. Sevens. By the time I woke Malcolm, the adrenaline had already burned away my fear. He didn't argue. He just nodded, eyes sharp now, no trace of the boy who'd begged for explanations weeks ago. Tell me where we start. Sevens. We drove through the morning fog, Chicago fading behind us as the city came alive. Marcus met us near the station with 2 agents. The place was crowded. Commuters, tourists, the usual noise. But I'd learned a long time ago that chaos was the best camouflage. Marcus pointed to a screen showing a still image. Aisha, hair tucked under a beanie, walking fast toward the northbound platform. Train leaves in 20 minutes, he said. My pulse quickened. Then we don't have long. Sevens. We split up. Marcus's team at the exits. Malcolm and I heading down the platform. Every passing face carried her possibility. I could feel my heart pounding in rhythm with the rails. Then I saw her. Black coat, sunglasses, duffel bag slung across her shoulder. She turned, and for a brief second, our eyes met. Recognition. Panic. Malcolm whispered. Mom. Sevens. I see her, I said. If you've ever hunted the person who almost destroyed your family, you know that strange calm, the moment your fear burns away, leaving only focus. And in that crowded station, surrounded by strangers, I knew one thing. Stevens. This chase wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about ending a legacy of lies, once and for all. Aisha bolted the moment our eyes met. She dropped her bag, shoving past commuters, sprinting toward the far platform. Marcus shouted orders into his radio, agents fanning out like clockwork. But I didn't wait. My body just moved. 30 years of courthouse discipline firing through muscle memory. Evelyn. Malcolm called behind me, but I was already running, heels clattering against the tile. Aisha darted through a maintenance gate, trying to lose herself between the trains. The air smelled of diesel and metal, and the cold bite of morning justice. When she reached the end of the platform, she turned, wild-eyed, desperate. You don't understand, she gasped. I had to. Sevens. I stopped a few feet away, chest heaving, rain mist settling on my coat. You had to steal from him? From the man who would have given you everything? Sevens. Her voice cracked, the mask finally slipping. I did what I was taught. Take before they take from you. That's how I survived. Sevens. For how long? I shot back. You've been surviving so long you forgot what living looks like. Sevens. Marcus and the agents closed in from both sides, weapons low, movements measured. Malcolm caught up, breathless, standing just behind me. Aisha, please, he said quietly. It doesn't have to end like this. Sevens. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for a heartbeat, the cold vanished from her face. Then her chin lifted, pride stiffening her spine. You'll thank me someday, she said bitterly, when you stop believing the world plays fair. Sevens. I took a step closer. The world doesn't play fair, sweetheart. That's why people like me exist, to make sure justice does. Sevens. Marcus gave the signal. The agents moved in, cuffing her wrists as she went limp. No struggle, no fight, just the hollow surrender of someone who'd finally run out of lies. As they led her away, she glanced over her shoulder. "You think you've won, Mrs. Carter?" "Sevens." I met her gaze steadily. "No, Aisha." "He did." "Sevens." I turned to Malcolm, who was watching silently, tears threatening but held back. "You did," I repeated softly. "You didn't let her break you." "Sevens." If you've ever stood at the end of a long fight for truth, you know that victory doesn't feel like celebration. It feels like quiet, exhausted relief. And in that echoing train station, amid the fading chaos, I realized this was never about catching Aisha. It was about reclaiming us. 3 months later, the courthouse on West Washington felt heavier than usual. The same marble floors I'd walked for 30 years now echoed with the weight of my own family's story. Reporters filled the hallway, microphones flashing, voices murmuring. The Carter case, the widow turned witness, the son she saved. Sevens. Inside courtroom 4B. Aisha Robinson, real name Nia Rollins, sat at the defense table, wrists bare but dignity gone. Her attorney whispered in her ear, while the prosecutor arranged files like weapons. I stood behind the witness stand, waiting for the bailiff's call. Funny how it felt strange hearing someone else say the words I'd spoken my whole career. Sevens. All rise. Sevens. When I took the stand, the oath tasted familiar and foreign all at once. My voice didn't shake. My name is Evelyn Carter. I served 30 years as an officer of this court. Sevens? The prosecutor nodded. Mrs. Carter, can you describe the events that led to the defendant's arrest? Sevens. I told them everything. The forged accounts, the poisoned wine, the sister who thought she could hide behind ignorance. Every detail laid bare under the sterile light of justice. At one point, Aisha's eyes met mine. For a second, I saw something flicker. Defiance, maybe shame. But it was gone before I could name it. When it was Malcolm's turn, he walked to the stand with quiet strength I hadn't seen since before the storm began. His voice was calm, steady. I loved her, he said simply. And I forgive her. But forgiveness doesn't mean freedom. Some debts are paid in years, not apologies. Sevens. A hush fell over the courtroom. Even the judge's expression softened. I looked at my son, my once broken boy, now standing tall, speaking truth not from anger, but from understanding. And in that moment, I realized justice wasn't something I'd taught him. It was something he'd grown into. If you've ever testified against someone who shattered your world, you know the strange peace that follows. It's not victory. It's closure. Because justice doesn't erase the past. It simply stops it from stealing your future. When Judge Whitaker finally entered the courtroom, the chatter died like a light switch flipping off. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Aisha sat motionless beside her attorney, chin high, eyes forward, the same composure she'd weaponized her entire life. The judge adjusted his glasses, scanning the stack of papers before him. Ms. Rollins, he began, voice low but steady. This court has reviewed the evidence and heard testimony from all parties involved. The pattern of deception, manipulation, and deliberate financial harm presented here is undeniable. Sevens. Aisha's lawyer stood, attempting one last plea for leniency. Your Honor, my client has shown cooperation, remorse. But the judge cut him off. Remorse. he said, is a privilege earned through truth. I have seen none. Sevens. The courtroom was silent except for the faint hum of the ceiling fans. Therefore, he continued, on counts of wire fraud, attempted murder, and identity theft, this court sentences you to 22 years in federal custody, with no eligibility for parole before 15. Sevens. The gavel struck once. Sharp. Final. Aisha's shoulders stiffened, but her face stayed unreadable. That perfect mask, finally useless. As the marshals approached, she turned slightly toward Malcolm and whispered something I couldn't hear. Maybe an apology. Maybe another lie. It didn't matter. Outside the courtroom, the sun hit us like a wave. Cameras flashed. Questions flew. But all I could hear was the echo of the gavel, the sound of a door closing on years of deceit. Malcolm stood beside me, hands trembling, then reached out and took mine. It's over, he said softly. Almost, I corrected. Justice never ends. It just changes form. Sevens. We walked down the courthouse steps together, surrounded by strangers who saw us as headlines, not history. But for me, it wasn't spectacle. It was survival. If you've ever stood beneath the weight of justice finally delivered, you know that's silence afterward. Not triumphant, not joyful, just still. Because closure doesn't come with applause. It comes with the quiet knowledge that truth, after all the chaos, still knows how to stand upright. 3 months after the sentencing, life began to sound different. Quieter, slower, almost bearable. The first morning of spring, Malcolm came by the house holding a stack of papers, and that familiar spark in his eyes, the one I hadn't seen since before the storm. I've been thinking, he said, spreading the forms across my dining table, about what comes next. Sevens. The header at the top read, Carter Trust Initiative, Financial Recovery for Victims of Deception. I blinked, surprised. You're starting a nonprofit? Sevens. He nodded. Not just me. Marcus offered to help with legal compliance, and the university's finance department wants to partner. We'll provide education, counseling, and emergency grants for people like me. People who lost everything because they trusted the wrong person. Sevens. I felt a swell in my chest that was half pride, half disbelief. My son, the man who once couldn't look truth in the eye, was now building something from its ashes. I thought I'd never touch money again without flinching, he admitted, voice softer now. But if I can use what happened to help someone else, maybe it won't all feel like wasted pain. Sevens. I smiled. Pain's only wasted when you let it end with you. Sevens. He looked up, eyes glistening. You'll help me, right? You'll be our advisor, the one who makes sure we do it right? Sevens. Of course, I said. But only if you promise to get a better logo than this. Sevens. He laughed. Real laughter. The kind I hadn't heard in months. And suddenly, the house didn't feel haunted anymore. Later that evening, as he left with his folder tucked under his arm, I stood at the window watching him cross the street. For the first time in a long while, he didn't look broken. He looked purposeful. If you've ever clawed your way through betrayal, you know that healing doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from repurposing. And as the sun dipped behind the Chicago skyline, I realized justice hadn't just punished the guilty. It had built a bridge for the innocent to start again. A few weeks later, Marcus dropped by unannounced, carrying a manila folder thick with printed reports. I knew that look on his face, the "you're not gonna like this" look I'd seen on detectives 100 times before. "I thought the case was closed," I said, pouring him coffee. "It is," he replied, sliding the folder across the table. But we dug deeper into Aisha's early records, before the aliases, before the cons. You need to see this. Sevens. Inside were social services reports, dated nearly 25 years ago. Foster care files. A childhood lived in chaos. Abusive homes. Systemic neglect. Bounced between guardians who saw her more as a paycheck than a person. One note stopped me cold. Sevens. Father denied bank loan. Family evicted. Child reported severe anxiety over money. Marcus sighed. The bank that foreclosed on her family, the same institution where Lorraine worked back then. They denied him because of risk profile. Code for the same racial bias that ruined a lot of black families trying to build something from nothing in those days. Sevens. I closed the folder slowly, feeling the edges cut against my palms. She spent her life fighting a system that broke her first, I murmured. And somewhere along the way, she became what she hated. Sevens. Marcus nodded. It doesn't excuse what she did, but it explains how she got there. Sevens. That night, I sat alone on my porch, the city humming softly around me. For the first time since the trial, I let myself feel something other than anger. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about erasing the crime. Maybe it was about acknowledging the wound, both hers and mine, and choosing not to let it define us anymore. I whispered into the quiet, "I forgive you, Aisha. Not because you deserve it, but because I do." Sevens. If you've ever carried hatred long enough, you learn it doesn't protect you. It poisons you. That night, I didn't feel pity or triumph. I just felt free, because justice had already done its job. Forgiveness was the part only I could finish. 3 years can turn a wound into wisdom if you let it. Chicago looked different now. Or maybe I did. The courthouse steps that once felt heavy with ghosts now carried the rhythm of new beginnings. I'd traded my bailiff's uniform for tailored suits and policy briefings, sworn in last spring as a community commissioner for the city. My job was to oversee justice reform and financial protection programs, the same kind of system that had failed my family once. Malcolm, meanwhile, had turned the Carter Trust initiative into something far bigger than either of us dreamed. Offices in 3 states, partnerships with universities, workshops teaching survivors how to rebuild credit, confidence, and trust. Watching him speak on stage at city events still caught me off guard. That calm authority, the kind that used to belong only to his father. One crisp morning, he stopped by my office with a cup of coffee and a grin. "They just approved funding for the youth mentorship branch," he said. "First pilot starts next month." Sevens. I smiled. And to think, all of this started with a doorbell at 1 a.m. Sevens. He laughed softly. Yeah. Guess that knock saved more than it broke. Sevens. If you've ever lived through something that shattered you, you know how strange healing feels. Not loud, not cinematic, just steady. Like breathing again after holding your breath too long. 3 years later, justice wasn't a courtroom word for us anymore. It was the way we lived. Sometimes, when the office gets quiet after hours, I still hear it, that faint echo of the doorbell at 12. 58 the sound that split my life into a before and after. That night used to haunt me. The rain, the look on Malcolm's face, the words, "She's gone." For a long time, I thought that was the moment everything fell apart. But 3 years later, I finally understand. That was the moment everything began. Because justice, as I've come to learn, isn't a verdict or a sentence. It's a process. It's the slow, stubborn act of standing back up every time the world knocks you down. When I walk past that same front door now, the one where my son collapsed and I made a vow to fight, I don't see loss anymore. I see ignition. The place where I remembered who I was. Not just a mother, not just a widow, but a woman who could turn heartbreak into motion. People sometimes ask me what justice feels like. I tell them it's not gavel strikes or newspaper headlines. It's quieter, like the hum of a city waking up after a storm. It's Malcolm's laughter at Sunday dinner. It's the phone calls from people we've helped rebuild their savings. It's knowing my sister Lorraine is serving her sentence, but writing apology letters to victims every week. That's the real justice. When consequences become change, not just punishment. I used to believe justice ended inside the courthouse. Now, I know it starts in living rooms, in whispered promises, in the messy courage of ordinary people choosing not to quit. If you've ever been through something that nearly broke you, remember this. The moment you decide to rise again, that's your verdict. And on quiet nights, when the city sleeps, I still thank that doorbell for waking me up. Over time, people began asking me to speak at schools, churches, and community meetings. Tell them what happened, they'd say, so no one else falls into the same trap. Sevens. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't a preacher or a professor, just a mother who'd refused to stay silent. But the more I spoke, the more I saw faces in the crowd, women, men, even teenagers, all wearing that same look of disbelief I'd once worn. The look of people who'd trusted too deeply and paid too high a price. So I tell them the truth. That trust isn't the enemy. Ignorance is. That love doesn't blind us. Denial does. And that sometimes justice doesn't need a badge or a courtroom. It just needs courage. I always end the same way. Sevens. If you've been betrayed, don't let that be your ending. Don't drown in anger. Channel it. Learn. Build something out of it. Because every scar you carry is proof that you survived. And survival is the seed of purpose. Sevens. The audience usually goes quiet after that. Not with pity, but with understanding. And in that silence, I see the ripple of something powerful beginning to move. So if you're listening now, maybe this is your moment. Maybe your knock at 1A, M, has already come. When it does, answer it. Because justice doesn't come to those who wait. It comes to those who act. That evening, as the sun melted behind the Chicago skyline, I walked out of City Hall. The same steps I'd once climbed as a bailiff, now as a commissioner. The air was crisp, steady, full of the quiet hum of a city that never stops rebuilding itself. I paused at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at the courthouse dome glowing in the twilight. My reflection shimmered faintly in the glass doors. Not the woman who once wore grief like armor, but someone who had learned to turn pain into policy, heartbreak into hope. 3 years ago, I thought justice meant punishment. Now I know better. Justice means transformation. When broken people build bridges, when victims become advocates, and when forgiveness feels stronger than revenge. The truth is, every one of us will face a moment when the knock comes, unexpected, unwelcome, undeniable. What you do next will define you. Will you crumble, or will you rise? If you've ever lost trust, been betrayed, or fought your way back to peace, this story is for you. Because justice isn't a title, a uniform, or a verdict. It's a choice. The daily decision to stand up when the world pushes you down. So I'll leave you with this question. Sevens. If that doorbell rang at 1 a.m., for you, would you answer it with fear or with courage? If this story moved you, if you saw a piece of your own struggle in it, sevens, tell me in the comments what justice means to you. Like, share, and subscribe if you believe that even the darkest betrayal can lead to the brightest redemption. Because somewhere, someone's 1 a.m. knock is happening right now. Sevens. And they need to know they're not alone.